We've got teams already preparing for next season, calling up a whole bunch of potentially interesting players. We're going to help you figure out whether or not those are players you want to add to your fantasy team over the final 6 weeks of the season here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Pick Six. Erik, Halterman, and Ryan Boyer here. We will be going over our top FAAB recommendations of the week. It's good to be back after being away last weekend at a family reunion. Ryan, did you pick up all the good players while I was gone, or did you leave some for me?
They're all gone, so your teams are pretty much shot. Sorry about that, Erik.
Darn, that's too bad. I didn't even know you could pick up players in my leagues when you weren't even in them. But yeah, looks like I am screwed. Should never have taken that vacation, but it is good to be back. I think we will find a good handful of names for everybody today. Like I mentioned in the open, a decent number of prospects getting called up. I think we can call them prospects, not all top prospects, although we'll have one of those to get to in a minute. The budget hitters section was easier to fill this week than normal. But as always, we're going to start with the headlines. And we've got a headline that we have seen before in our lives. Tyler Glasnow lands on the injured list. This time it is right elbow tendonitis. How worried about this one are we? Is this looking to you like one of those workload management IL stints where they're setting Glasnow up for the playoffs? Or is this looking like one which might mean he's not even available for the playoffs?
It certainly seems like the former. Glasnow is trying to reportedly argue his way into making his start as scheduled today. And Dave Roberts downplayed it, saying that he fully expects Glasnow to be back when his 15 days are up. However, it is also Tyler Glasnow. We've seen plenty of arm issues with him before. Just before the show, Erik was typing his name into the search bar and accidentally typed elbow instead of Glasnow, just to give you a heads up.
This is true.
Gives you an idea of what comes to mind with Tyler Glasnow. But this is his second IL stint. I can't remember what the last one was for. It was not arm related, I don't think, but it was maybe minimum.
It was tall man back. Remember, it was brief stint on the IL with tall man back around the All-Star game, and that one definitely looked workload management more than anything else.
Right. So I mean, especially for him, he's actually been kind of a workhorse this year, surprisingly. The Dodgers, of course, always do their best to stretch out their starters, giving them as much rest in between starts. I'd have to look at his game log. I don't know if he's made a start on quote-unquote regular rest all year or how many he's made. Probably not that many, if any. But yeah, it seems not worrisome currently. If here in a few days we get news that he's not quite ready to throw, then I might start to get nervous. But yeah, it looks like Bobby Miller coming up to make the start today, which ordinarily you'd say, wow, it's quite what a luxury. You have a pitcher get hurt and you can bring up Bobby Miller to fill in for him. But Bobby Miller's been surprisingly bad this year. I still have lots of long-term hope for Bobby Miller, but would not necessarily go out to rush and add him in redrafts. Looks like it could be probably just the 2 starts, I'm guessing, filling in for Glasnow, and then he'll go back down. But I don't know, maybe he's worth in deeper leagues a roster spot and just keep him on the bench just in case he looks like 2023 Bobby Miller.
Yeah, we'll touch on Miller a little bit more lately. I'm going to bring him up in the priority ad section just to see whether or not we should be taking a chance on him in some of those shallower leagues. He is actually right at the 50% ownership threshold on Yahoo, which we use for a lot of these, but I think we may end up in a similar place there. Just looking at Glasnow's game log as far as I can tell, there's only one time this year where he started on 4 days rest, and that was in early June. But he has actually reached his career high in starts and in innings. So all of that points to workload management being a main concern for the Dodgers. Although with the Padres and Diamondbacks both going on a charge, only 3 games back in the division, this is a team that I had been thinking all year they are a shoo-in for a bye. They're thinking about October from day one. That's not quite as much the case, so that's interesting timing if this is purely workload management. I would imagine it's not purely that in that case, and that there is, something real going on with Glasnow's elbow, but I don't think I'd be dropping him. I think I would be hoping he returns as soon as possible. It's just once a pitcher's had an elbow or injury this season, you can't help but worry about all of his subsequent starts. Are we going to see Tyler Glasnow on the mound, or are we going to see Tyler Glasnow coming off a recent elbow injury who's only 90% as good as he is normally? Even that version, though, you're going to use in most fantasy formats. So I think you at least have to hold him through this weekend. It's a tough time of year, right, where pretty much any injury,
right,
you have to give at least serious consideration to a drop. You don't automatically drop everybody who gets hurt, but there's only 6 weeks left. If a guy misses 4 of them, you're dropping almost every player in that situation. Maybe not Glasnow, especially in a league with playoffs. If you can get a start from him in the semifinals and another in the finals, absolutely. You could have him be out a month until then, and he's still worth it. But tough decision. I think we're both, for now, on the side of keeping him and hoping that we don't hear news of a setback that changes our minds next week. We've got more injury-related news. Starling Marte is due to come back from a knee injury, could return Sunday. He has been out since June 22nd, so it'll end up being nearly 2 months there. What do you think Starling Marte has left? Anywhere where he's been dropped? Is he a priority ad for you, or just a guy at this point in his career?
I mean, I would pick him up wherever he was available. As you mentioned, we're at this point in the season where we can't be too precious with a roster spot. So I guess it just depends on your situation, maybe. But I mean, he was pretty good before getting hurt. I know he had slumped right before the IL stint. I suspect that was probably related to the knee injury. But overall, he had been pretty good, pretty productive for fantasy managers who took he was a basically bargain basement price in drafts this spring. He wound up, the first couple of months was looking like a nice value. But then the injury struck, as they often do with him. Seems at least he's over those, hip or core injuries. I know he had surgery on both hips, I think, maybe, over the last year and a half calendar. But yeah, I think the Mets probably won't overdo it with him now that they especially have Jesse Winker added to the mix. But I mean, Winker, I guess, probably is going to be the guy to lose the most playing time here. He was actually surprisingly, to me, he hasn't played quite as much as I figured he would since they traded for him. Like, he's even sat against a few righties. So his playing time has been trending in the wrong direction, and that could only continue after Marte comes back. As I mentioned, I suspect they'll try to mix in extra off days, try to keep Marte healthy. He's 36 years old at this point, and pretty injury prone, fair to say. But yeah, I mean, as long as he's in the lineup, I think he's, especially in 5 outfielder leagues, I think he should be rostered.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Jesse Winker, more steals than Starling Marte this season, 14 to 12 there. Although Jesse Winker has not attempted a steal since moving to the Mets. I would imagine that will probably remain the case. He did not suddenly get much faster with the Nationals. He just joined a team that decided to run all the time. We've got a fantasy football question in the chat, but I'm afraid we're not the right ones to answer it. So I'll say pick the first one. Moving back to baseball, let's go to Spencer Torkelson, who is back with the Tigers. That could be big news. this is somebody who was one of the most exciting prospects in baseball not too long ago. Down the stretch, he's back. He should get the opportunity to show what he can do with the Tigers. The Tigers don't really have anything to play for right now other than seeing what their young infield can do. And we'll get to a couple other guys getting their first chance at the big leagues this week later in the show. But Spencer Torkelson, who had a 597 OPS in 54 games to start the season before he was set down, and wasn't even that good in the minors really either, for pretty much all the time he was down there. His numbers ticked up a bit in the last few weeks, but even then, not that much. Do you want to talk me into adding Spencer Torkelson, or should we let him be someone else's problem?
I would lean towards the latter. Not only a lack of production in the minors, he also was striking out a lot at AAA Toledo. So that's not very encouraging. I mean, I was in on Spencer Torkelson coming into the season, but he has had, since arriving in the majors, had long stretches where he just has not looked very good. And obviously that includes very much this season. And as we mentioned, not great numbers in the minors either. So it's hard to be super encouraging. He's still pretty young. Obviously the pedigree is there. I'm not going to completely jump ship on him over the long term, but on August 17th, whenever you're listening to this, I can't imagine that you're in a situation where you really need to shoehorn Spencer Torkelson into your lineup. If you're looking for a power boost, you're not going to find that kind of upside on the waiver wire very easily. So I'm fine with rolling the dice on him in a deeper league. Maybe in a shallower league, if you have an extra bench spot, you can add him and see how he looks for the first week or two, and then just cut him if he's still looking bad. But I would not make him a priority in redraft leagues.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. If he had shown something more in the minors where it looked like, okay, he's clearly knows how to hit, he's just struggling at the majors for some reason, then I'd be more interested. But he looks, if you look at his minor league stats, he looks like someone who would be struggling at the major league level. So unfortunately, hard to get too excited. I think maybe the one type of league where I might have some interest, if we're talking a keeper league where he had been dropped, a lot of keeper leagues, he might have just been kept, but a keeper league where he'd been dropped, I do like thinking in these last 6 weeks or so, if I'm not winning and I'm not in the race to win a keeper league, one thing you could do is use this time to try to find some keepable regulars for next year. And I think the odds that Torkelson doesn't start the year as the Tigers' everyday first baseman, I think are still low, right? I think the plan will be get him back on his feet, have him be the everyday guy next year. I highly doubt I'm going to come into the year having him ranked higher than like 23rd among first basemen. But in a lot of deeper keeper leagues, if you can have a guy who plays every day for, $2, it's good to have some keepers who are just steady and boring and very cheap to give you money to spend on more interesting players. So I think in a league like that, maybe try to get Spencer Torkelson, give him a 6-week tryout. And if it looks like he's just worth keeping for $1 or $2, he really doesn't have to be that good. If he's just playing all the time and looks like he's just barely good enough that he's going to be in your lineup, then yeah, you can have him be one of your keepers as long as he's very cheap.
Yep, I can sign off on that. And he'll turn just 25 later this month. So
yeah,
still young enough to turn around. I mean, he hit 30 home runs last year. It's not a perfect profile, but still some long-term hope, I think, for him. So if you have the opportunity, I think it's okay to take a shot.
And one final bit of news. We've got Zach Littell hitting the IL with shoulder fatigue. Opens up a spot in the Rays rotation, perhaps, although maybe they'll just do some sort of opener-follower thing. Tyler Alexander was recalled, could be that follower, or maybe this just keeps Shane Baz with a safer rotation spot the rest of the way. Or do you think maybe time for Drew Rasmussen to start pitching in a longer role? He was recently used as an opener, hasn't pitched more than 2 innings in the major league level this season since returning from Tommy John surgery. What would your read be on this Tampa situation?
Yeah, as excited as I would be to see Drew Rasmussen, maybe not as excited as Uncle Ted would be to see him move into the rotation. But I can't see the Rays abandoning their plan based on this. I think he'll just pitch 1 or 2 innings at a time still. And I suspect it's going to be a lot of Tyler Alexander, who has a couple kind of random nice feats to his credit with didn't he tie the AL consecutive strikeout record a few years ago? And he carried a no-hitter into like the 8th inning earlier this year. So a couple nice random anecdotes for Tyler Alexander in an otherwise very nondescript career, but I would not be interested in adding him for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I would either. 5.20 ERA on the season, 4.52 over the course of his 6-year career. Let's move to the priority FAAB ads of the week right after this message from DraftKings Pick 6. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds? Or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. And we are back here on the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman and Ryan Boyer here sharing our top FAAB recommendations of the week. Let's start with some hitters. Who are you kicking us off with, Ryan?
I've got Jhonkensy Noel as my first FAAB recommendation. Kind of the modern day. Is it modern day? Modern day William Opeña, kind of both in stature and profile.
Yeah.
9 home runs, 17 RBI, and just 98 plate appearances so far with the Guardians. Look back at those AAA numbers: 937 OPS, 18 home runs in 65 games. Now here's the rub: 31.6% strikeout rate, 5.1% walk rate during his time with the Guardians. So he's very much a all or nothing type hitter. He has massive raw power for sure. And as you can see, he's capable of hitting some home runs in bunches. So I think if you're looking for that category in particular, he's a viable addition. Would not count on him hitting for a good batting average at all. If you're basically just hoping he keeps you afloat in that regard. But I mean, he started the last 4 games for Cleveland, started 5 out of the last 6. He's kind of playing, I don't want to say playing over Lane Thomas, but Lane Thomas has been so bad for Cleveland that it seems like Noel of late has been more of a priority to get into the lineup. As I mentioned, I mean, he's just as likely to go into a 2-week funk, and he's an easy drop. But while he's hot, while he's hitting home runs, if you need home runs, I'm fine with throwing a couple bucks at Jhonkensy Noel.
Yeah, I like it. I think when Noel first came up, he was interesting, but was only on the short side of a platoon. So despite him being fun, it was hard to justify adding him. But he has been playing nearly every day recently, like you said, over Lane Thomas. And if that's the case, you will know whether or not you need Jhonkensy Noel. That's the nice thing about him. He is such an extreme player. If you need batting average and you're set on power, don't think about him. But if you need power and you're set on batting average, He is just, again, such an extreme player. You look at some of his scouting reports, 80 grade raw power over at Fangraphs. That's the type of guy we're talking about. Also 20 grade speed. If you have not yet seen a picture of this guy, hopefully you can picture him in your head at this point. Terrible plate approach, horrible strikeout rate you mentioned, also doesn't walk at all. So very limited player. He does one thing, but if you need that one thing, we're at the point in the year where you know what your fantasy team needs. And if it's power, go get Jhonkensy Noel. My first hitter here is Junior Caminero, who technically doesn't qualify, I think, for our filters. We like discussing guys who are still out there in at least half of Yahoo leagues. And I think Caminero is now taken in just over half of them after he was called up earlier this week. But, we couldn't have talked about him last week, or we could have, but he wasn't up yet. But we have mentioned him throughout the year because we thought he was going to be up, really. Junior Caminero was a popular sleeper back in draft season because we'd actually seen him last year for 7 games, but mostly, I think, injuries prevented him from really getting going in the minors, and he's only making his debut this week. But seems like the Rays have a lot invested in him. He's been batting 5th against both righties and lefties since he's arrived. He's also already stolen a base, which is interesting. I'm viewing him more as a 4-category contributor, I think. Doesn't have big steals in the minors really at any level. He had 12 in the low minors back in 2022. But most of Caminero can hit for power and average. At least at his peak, he should be a very good all-around hitter. Should give you at least a decent average and great power is really what the scouting reports say. Question is, how close to peak Caminero are we going to get over these last 6 weeks? He just turned 21 last month. So this is still technically his age 20 season. And if you look at his numbers at the AAA level, he wasn't crushing it down there, a 110 WRC plus in 53 games. So I think the Junior Caminero we see in the year 2029 is going to be a lot better than the one we see this August and September. But this is the number 2 prospect we're talking about at RotoWire. You don't get guys like this coming along very often. And yes, I know we've seen a whole bunch of prospects disappoint this year. And so if you go all out for Junior Caminero, you might just see him struggle for a few games and then lose his regular role, just like Jackson Holliday did, for example. But if you're in a position where you need something to break right and Junior Caminero is available, there aren't many guys who could break more right than him. So if you are, especially if you're trailing by a few spots, I think is when you definitely want to get a player like Junior Caminero and hope that he can help lead a charge down the stretch. So I think it's going to take real money to get him a good portion of whatever you have left at this point in the season. That might only be 6, 7, 8%, but I think you got to go get Junior Caminero, even though there's a very real chance that he's merely holds his own now as a 21-year-old and really takes off next year or maybe even 3 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, you never know at someone that age, regardless of pedigree, if they're going to hit the ground running. As you mentioned, Jackson Holliday, a good example. He was dreadful for 10 games, got sent back down. He's looking a lot better this time around. But, I mean, Caminero didn't take long to showcase his excellent raw power. I think it was a single, but I know the first day he was up, he had the 116 miles per hour batted ball. It was like 5 miles per hour faster than any other ball that night in baseball. So just gives you an example of the kind of upside that he has in his bat. And at this time of the year, maybe you can catch lightning in a bottle. Another youngish guy, a different profile that I'm going to recommend next, Pete Crow-Armstrong with the Chicago Cubs. He started 19 straight games, started all but one game going back to July 10th for the Cubs. And he's actually starting to hit a little bit. 873 OPS, 2 home runs, 5 stolen bases over his last 18 games. He's now 23 for 23 on stolen base attempts this season. Only Bobby Witt and Victor Scott have a higher sprint speed via StatCast than Pete Crow-Armstrong. It's top end speed for sure. And Cody Bellinger actually returned to the outfield yesterday. That was his first game playing the field since coming back from the IL. He was coming back from a fractured finger, having issues gripping the ball, so they had limited him to DH duties. But even with Cody Bellinger back in the field, Pete Crow-Armstrong still started in center field. Bellinger was over in right. Seiya Suzuki in the DH spot. I think that's going to be the more days than not probably the setup for the Cubs. Mike Tauchman really is not playing at all anymore. So I think they want to ride Pete Crow-Armstrong. I don't know that the bat is fully formed yet. I do think there's still some upside in his bat as well. And as I mentioned, he's been hitting well of late. But definitely for a speed element, he can bring that. And if it's speed, if it's stolen bases, the category you need to play catch-up in here down the stretch, he's worth a handful of FAAB dollars for sure to see if he can help out in that regard.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's the appeal with Crow-Armstrong is his defense is so good that he's going to get this everyday playing time, even when the bat wasn't there. And, you didn't have to roster him the early part of this season because the bat hadn't been there yet. But I think going forward, for most of Crow-Armstrong's career, I think he's going to be able to have a long career where he plays every day and is a below average hitter, but runs enough that it works for fantasy. I think somebody like a Kevin Kiermaier in his best years is what you're hoping for with Pete Crow-Armstrong. And if the playing time's there and the recent performance is there, I can get behind it. You mentioned his bat. His strikeout rate now 22.5%. That's league average. His hard hit rate 36% isn't so bad. It doesn't look that far from a completely fine bat. I don't think we're going to get a good bat from Crow-Armstrong, but close enough. If you need speed, definitely go for him. Sticking with the theme of young guys, I've got Jace Jung up next. Was just called up by the Tigers, who also called up, as we talked about, Spencer Torkelson and Trey Sweeney, who is going to show up later in the show. Jace Jung, more of an interesting prospect. I just want to make sure I've got his exact number here. He is the 80th ranked prospect here at RotoWire, so not an elite prospect, but a pretty good one. Somebody who should get the chance to play every day at third base, I would imagine, down the stretch. And the playing time is perhaps the main appeal here, that he doesn't have to be that good in deeper leagues if he's playing every day. But he could be pretty good. If we look at his AAA numbers, a 117 WRC plus, so a solidly above average hitter, even if he wasn't setting the world on fire. 14 homers in 91 games, though just 2 steals, so don't expect much there. His plate discipline numbers were quite good at 16% walk rate against a 22% strikeout rate, although he is considered a power over hit if you look at his scouting report. Uppercut swing in particular might mean high batting average, low batting average, high power. And so kind of like we talked about with Jhonkensy Noel earlier, just less extreme and hasn't done it at the big league level for the last couple of weeks like Noel has done it. So more of a speculative ad here for Jung, but Jung has, I think, more potential than some of the rookies who we'll talk about later in the show, like Trey Sweeney or Shea Whitcomb or Will Wagner. So I don't think we need to go too high on Jung because he didn't set the world on fire in the minors, but at least $2-3. A rookie with some upside down the stretch. See where this one goes.
Yep, I'm good with throwing a couple of bucks at him. He reminds me a little bit of his new teammate, Colt Keith, kind of not an elite prospect, but a good prospect, left-handed bat. He's going to be probably held back some by Comerica Park. Colt Keith got off to a really bad start this year, but his bat, we've seen it eventually start to come around a little bit. So yeah, I'm with you that I'm not going to go crazy for my FAAB bid for Jace Jung, but he's definitely worth a look for a couple dollars. Another young guy, keep the theme going. Jacob Wilson looks like he's going to be back in the majors pretty soon. He lasted all of, I think, 3.5, 4 innings or something like that in his major league debut, strained his hamstring. But he's starting a rehab assignment today, I believe. And maybe return next week. Seems doable. When he was promoted, I mean, we went over the numbers at that time, but I'll rehash them again for you. Just absolutely absurd numbers that he put up in the minors. 438 batting average, 475 on base percentage, 686 slugging percentage, 7 home runs, 2 stolen bases in 46 games. I don't know ultimately what the counting stats ceiling is for Jacob Wilson. He doesn't have great power. He doesn't really have much speed. He might just be a kind of batting average specialist. And those rate stats can be a little tougher to make up ground in this late in the season. But, I mean, if you're looking for someone who could potentially stabilize your average, if you're looking to just hold off some guys behind you in your league that are chasing you in batting average, I think he's certainly got the potential in that regard. Probably back in the waiver wire in a good number of leagues. I would imagine he was dropped after he got injured. And I think he's worth scooping back up, even if there's not a ton of power, a ton of speed element in his game.
Yeah, he's yet another player today with a very extreme profile, but I think this time of year, you know what you need. And if what you need is batting average, I think Jacob Wilson can help you there, even though we've seen him for all of 1 plate appearance at the major league level. The guy struck out 9.9% of the time in the minors last year after being drafted 6th overall out of Grand Canyon University. And then this year, 6.5% strikeout rate in the minors. And those are absurd numbers. That's Luis Arias territory. And you'll probably see that number jump against big league pitching, but what's it going to jump to? If it doubles, he's still going to have a 13% strikeout rate, which almost guarantees a pretty good batting average. So I'm not sure what the whole picture will look like for Jacob Wilson, but I'm pretty sure he should help you out in at least one area if that's what you need. Let's move over to the pitchers, where I'm going to start with Bobby Miller, who we teased earlier. Likely that he's not available in a deeper league, but in some of these shallower leagues, he still qualifies for our show, or at least he did this morning. Was available in half of Yahoo leagues. If he has a good start today against the Cardinals, he will be snapped up everywhere, presumably. And so I guess maybe just ignore the next few minutes and just look at what he does in that start. And if it's good, then he's going to stick around and go get Bobby Miller yesterday. And if it's bad, he's not going to stick around long at all. But Bobby Miller really was not having much success and was dealing with injuries at the major league level. He's got an 8.07 ERA and a 1.83 whip in 7 major league starts. And then in 5 AAA starts, only 1 more strikeout than walk with a 5.82 ERA and a 1.75 whip. And I can't really point to his last starts and say, well, actually, it's been trending in the right direction. His last 2 starts, he gave up a combined 9 runs in 8 innings with 7 walks and 7 strikeouts. So I'm saying nothing at all positive here, and maybe just shouldn't have included him on the rundown. But it's Bobby Miller, and he's back in the majors, so we're going to have to at least think about picking him up. If he has a good start, or even a decent start, if he goes 5 innings, gives up 2 runs, 4 strikeouts, 2 walks, that's not even that good, but it's not terrible. Should we be prepared for Bobby Miller to be a fantasy difference maker, or is he just somebody who we should think of as a streamer at best? And if we get anything out of him the rest of this year, count ourselves lucky.
Streaming is tough. I don't think you want to roll the dice on streaming him today. If he does look good today, maybe I don't know who he would line up to start against next week.
I can pull that up.
But as Erik, I see him typing on his computer. He's gonna find out for us.
Yeah, it could be next weekend against the Rays, maybe, and then maybe a midweek start against the Orioles at home after that, perhaps. Not great.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the starts at AAA. I mean, we mentioned the last 2 starts. The start before that, he had made 3 total starts after being sent down, and he had 5 shutout innings in the first one, but he also had 4 walks and 4 strikeouts. So just not really sharp. He didn't get called up because he was looking good in the minors. I mean, we should mention that, AAA Oklahoma City it's a tough environment to pitch, tough league to pitch in, but you would expect a guy like Bobby Miller, if he was sharp, to overcome any kind of environmental or league offense ballpark issues in the minors. That should not be a concern for him. And he was not putting up good numbers, but he's also Bobby Miller. There's a reason everybody was wanting him in draft season this spring. Maybe he's figures something out in a short window here with the Dodgers, and they have no choice but to keep him in the rotation. I would not be counting on it, though. Like I mentioned before when we were discussing Glass now, I think if you have the opportunity, adding him to your bench and just kind of seeing where it goes is the route to take. But I'm not super optimistic. My next guy is a reliever, moving to the relief ranks, and Seranthony Dominguez with the Orioles. Last 2 saves for Baltimore. He also pitched the 9th inning with a 4-run lead on 3 occasions. So in addition to those 2 saves, he's been used very much like a closer, even if Brandon Hyde is not wanting to name him the closer. Craig Kimbrell had another awful outing last night. Prior to that awful outing, Kimbrell had been bad recently as well. 8.31 ERA, 11 walks over his last 8 2/3 innings. Had blown 2 saves during that time. And Seranthony Dominguez has been really good since being traded to the Orioles. 1 run, 10 strikeouts, 3 walks, and 9 innings. I mean, Erik, as a Phillies guy, it hasn't always been smooth sailing with Seranthony Dominguez, but he's definitely shown the potential to be dominant at times. I'm not going to count on him being a lockdown closer the rest of the way, but I do think it's in there potentially, and he's on, arguably the best team in baseball. So I think he's pretty close to must roster at this point. And if you're in need of saves down the stretch, I don't know that there's going to be another guy worth saving your money for, your FAAB dollars for more than Dominguez.
Yeah, that seems right to me. Dominguez, when he was a rookie, all the way back in 2018 at this point, he had 16 saves as a rookie, a 2.95 ERA, an 0.93 whip, a 32% strikeout rate. He looked like the closer of the present and the future. He took a little step back that next season, and then it was actually really unfortunate timing for him. He needed Tommy John surgery in February of 2020, or it wasn't 100% certain that he would or something. And I believe, if I remember the story right, he went home to the Dominican as the pandemic started and then couldn't get the procedure done there and wasn't able to return to America to get it done. So he ended up what would have been a procedure he could have gotten done in February 2020 and returned the middle of the 2021 season. He ended up missing basically 2 whole years because he had to delay that surgery by several months due to COVID. He only threw 1 inning in 2021, but he got back there in 22 and 23, combined 11 saves across those 2 seasons, but had been trending in the wrong direction the last few years. But he's just 29 and again has that pedigree where he burst onto the scene looking like he was going to close for several years. So if he's back at that level, like you said, it's in there. It would be pretty cool to see him having some run of good health and a clear closer role. I think he could just take it and run with it. On Craig Kimbrell, though, who hasn't had a save in over a month now, his last save was July 7th. Is there any reason he still needs to be on a fantasy roster at this point? Or if you've got him and you need saves, Are you at least keeping him on your bench in hopes that he gets the job back? Or do you just say, I don't think it's his year anymore?
I would lean towards the latter. I mean, I always throw this caveat out there. I mean, if you have the roster space and you can afford that bench spot to devote to potential saves down the line, sure. But I think at this juncture of the season, I'm certainly not going out of my way to hang on to Kimbrel.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Let's move to my next pitcher here. Is the guy you actually talked about last week, but in the budget section, I believe, Zebby Matthews. I believe he was on last week's show. That was before he had made his debut. Matthews has now made his debut. It was 5 solid innings against the Royals, allowed 5 hits, just 2 runs, 5 strikeouts, and 0 walks. Daniel Zebulon Matthews, an excellent name here. Reminds me of Orion Kerkering in both his excellent name and the speed with which he tore through the minors, and is going to show up and play a role for a contender down the stretch and maybe in the postseason. Matthews started the year in high A, but he's going to end it, I think, as a member of a contender's rotation. I'm pretty sure he's here to stay as long as his next few starts go well. Joe Ryan probably out for the year or very close to it with a shoulder strain, a grade 2 Harris major strain. Looks like a season-ending injury, probably, or at least a regular season-ending injury to me. Chris Paddock also out with a forearm strain and undergoing another MRI in 10 days, so he's not coming back anytime soon. So the point is, the opportunity is there for Matthews. You aren't just betting on a spot start here. And I think the talent's there as well. He's a fast rising prospect, so it's hard to get a sense of exactly what that talent is, but he shot all the way up to number 54 on the latest prospect rankings at RotoWire from James Anderson. A control first profile makes me worry a little bit that those strikeout numbers might collapse against major league pitching. But he's posting walk rates of 1% and 2% at his minor league stops. I believe it was 1.9% total across all his 3 levels this year. That's absurd control. It's George Kirby level stuff. I don't know if he's going to have George Kirby's career, but if you're that good in control and you're also missing minor league bats, I'm pretty excited. I want to see what happens if he misses enough major league bats. He's a star. If he doesn't miss a ton of major league bats, well, his control is going to keep him as a very solid mid-rotation starter. I think the projections haven't caught up yet because he's rising through the system just so fast. But this is an interesting player with some outlier characteristics, and I want to take a shot on Zebby Matthews for sure. So I think at least, $3, $4, or $5. I know that budgets are smaller this time of year, but given the opportunity, given how quickly he's rising, I think he's probably for real. And I would invest more than just $1 or $2 in Zebby Matthews.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think the ultimate long-term, he's probably more of a mid-rotation guy. I think the ultimate ceiling probably doesn't reflect what his minor league numbers suggest. But that's not, it sounds like a slight, but I'm really not trying to make it sound like that. I'm very much interested in him as well, particularly like from a whip perspective, and the control is so good. He could stabilize that whip. He's pitching for a good team, could pick up some wins down the stretch. And as you mentioned, the opportunity is definitely there. Opportunity also there again for Cody Bradford with the Rangers. Last 2 starts, 11 innings, 2 runs, 9-2 strikeout to walk rate. If you can remember all the way back in April, his first 3 starts of the season were awesome as well before that back/rib injury. 1.40 ERA, 0.62 whip, 17-2 strikeout to walk rate, and 19 in a third innings. I don't know what the ceiling ultimately is for Cody Bradford, and he doesn't have maybe not quite Zebby Matthews or George Kirby level control, but he has very, very good control. Always consistently with the low walk rates. And he's also got very inviting upcoming schedule. Looks like the next 2 starts at home against the Pirates, on the road against the White Sox. And depending on how the Rangers rotation shakes out, could get Max Scherzer back at some point, and also Jacob deGrom as well. But potentially another start after that could be against the A's, who aren't the pushover offensively that we thought they might be coming into the season, but that's still a pretty decent matchup for Cody Bradford. So I think maybe more of a floor play than a ceiling play, but I think he's worth scooping back up, and not sure he's going to cost more than $1 or $2 to find out.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. A good floor play as long as the rotation spot is there, and it seems to be there for now. That is also basically the appeal of Nick Martinez. Take that same profile, but shove it in a much worse park, and that's basically Nick Martinez. Martinez, maybe a little bit more of a track record at the major league level. It really has been quite good as a swingman since returning from overseas a few years ago. His 3 seasons, he's got ERAs of 3.47, 3.43, and now 3.25. Very useful player, even if he spends more of his time in relief each of those years. But Nick Martinez should be a rotation member the rest of the way for the Reds. And since he returned to the rotation in early August, he's been quite good. I guess slightly worse after he gave up 3 runs on 8 hits against the Royals yesterday, after I had already put him on the outline. But that was still a quality start, and still 4 strikeouts against 0 walks. In his previous 2 starts, he'd gone 12 scoreless innings, striking out 12, walking 0, and allowing just 5 hits. So it's been quite a good run for Martinez since his return to the rotation. If you look at his numbers the entire season, I mentioned that 3.25 ERA with just a 1.05 whip, because he just refused to walk guys this year. He cut his walk rate, which was typically around league average, all the way to 2.5%. Only a 20% strikeout rate. Not very exciting. And again, just more of an innings eater, swingman type, but very solid, reliable guy who I would avoid in the tough matchups at home. But he's better than you think. I think, given that, that role means you might not think about him, and the fact that he was gone from the majors for several years means you might not think about him. But Nick Martinez, since he's been back, totally fine. Mid-rotation, maybe back-end starter, as long as you avoid those tough matchups in Cincinnati. Although just looking at his projected next few starts, it looks like he'll be at Toronto next week, and then the week after that, a potential 2-starter, both at home, but against Oakland and Milwaukee. So I think you could probably use that. So Nick Martinez, another floor play. Don't go too crazy here, just $1 or $2. But when he's in the rotation, he's completely solid. So don't be afraid to look his way. Should we go back on over to Pick 6? We're going to do our weekly game here. We're each going to make 3 picks using the RotoWire Pick 6 page with all about the games tonight. If you are following along live, you can make the picks with us. If you are catching this show after the fact, you can laugh at everything we got wrong. You want to start us off, Ryan? Who you got?
Yeah, I got Mookie Betts over 9.5 fantasy points, going up against Andre Pallante tonight, who has extreme reverse splits in his career. Mookie Betts, just back from the IL, didn't go out on a rehab assignment. You might think, well, he's probably going to be a little rusty, but you also need to be reminded that he's still Mookie Betts. So, of course, he has 2 hits in all 4 games since coming back from the IL, already has 2 home runs. So, good matchup, and he's already looking sharp, fresh off the IL. It's a high number, 9.5 points, but I like the matchup against Pallante, so I'll roll with the over on Mookie Betts.
All right, I'm taking a look at what our picks tool recommends specifically for Padres at Rockies tonight and seeing what's out there. I'm going to side with the Coors Field aspect here over the lack of a platoon advantage, and I'm going to say Luis Arias, more than 1.5 total bases. Our site likes this one. He's going up against a fellow lefty in Kyle Freeland, but it's Kyle Freeland at Coors Field. I think Luis Arias, either one double or two singles, gets him there. It's showing up all blue, which is good on our tools here. Seems to really like it, and I can get behind that. I think Luis Arias, at least 2 total bases tonight at Coors Field.
Yep, and I'm going to pick on another weaker starting pitcher again here. Chris Flexen is in Houston tonight. I'm going to take the Yordan Alvarez over 9.5 fantasy points. Flexen, 888 OPS. He's given up 12 home runs in 227 plate appearances against left-handed batters this season. Yordan Alvarez, you might have heard, he swings the bat from the left side of the plate, and he's also very, very good. So I will take Yordan Alvarez against a below-average starting pitcher at home. 9.5 fantasy points. I'm taking the over.
I like it. I am sticking in this Colorado-San Diego game. I'm looking at Dylan Cease for some positive ones, even though it's Coors Field. Our tool seems to like it because, you know, who he gets to face when he goes to Coors Field is the Rockies, and they're not very good. There's a couple interesting ones here. I'm deciding between the more than 17.5 outs, which is basically just betting on him to go at least 6 innings, or more than 7.5 strikeouts. I may end up circling back to the other one, but I'm going to say that Dylan Cease goes at least 6 innings tonight against the Rockies. He actually hasn't done that his last few starts, but one of them was a rain delay, and the others he came very close. Dylan Cease has faced the Rockies in Coors once this season. Back in April, he went 7 innings, gave up 1 run on 1 hit, struck out 8 with no walk. So clearly he's able to get it done there. So I'll go with Dylan Cease to go more than 17.5 outs.
My next pick, I mentioned before how bad Lane Thomas had been since joining the Guardians. I'm going to take the under on 6.5 fantasy points with him. 5 for 48. He's driven in 0 runs. He's got a 38.9% strikeout rate with the Guardians. Just not doing much for his new team. And facing Freddie Peralta tonight, who has had less than a stellar season by Freddie Peralta standards, I think it's fair to say, but still a good pitcher going up against a fellow right-hander who is struggling mightily. And 6.5 isn't super low, so I think that's a pretty easy under for me.
All right, I will finish things off with, let's go Matt Olson to get more than 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBI tonight at Anaheim. He will get the platoon advantage against Griffin Canning, who is the type of pitcher I would like to target in something like this. I like the 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBI prop because basically if you have a good game, you hit it. You can't really have a good game without hitting it. I think Matt Olson is a good bet to have a good game against Griffin Canning. It's been a down year for Olson, but he's been on an upswing lately. That will wrap up our Pick 6 section here. Again, you can check out our Pick 6 page or our Pick'em app as well. Back to the main topic of the day. Let's move to the budget pitchers. Who is your favorite budget pitcher of the week, Ryan?
Matthew Boyd looked really good in his season and Guardians debut against the Cubs. 5 1/3 innings, 1 run, 6 strikeouts, and no walks. And looked really, really good in his rehab assignment as well. 0.83 ERA, 27-2 strikeout to walk rate in 21 2/3 innings over those 5 rehab starts. And Matthew Boyd has flashed big strikeout upside in the past. Had like well over 200 strikeouts a few years ago in a season. He has had major home run issues. That's, I think, largely what has held him back from being consistent, even though he has often been able to miss bats. So if he can just keep those kind of to a dull roar, and he's on a good Guardians team, he's got 2 starts next week. First one is at Yankee Stadium, which can be a problem for a guy who has home run issues, but Matthew Boyd is looking sharp as he comes back from Tommy John surgery. And as I mentioned, on a good team, I think he's at the very least a viable streaming option.
Yeah, nowhere near as exciting as some of the injury returnees we've had in recent weeks. He's no Clayton Kershaw or Robbie Ray, but at his peak, he was pretty interesting, and he's still young enough that I think even if he's nowhere near his peak, he should be serviceable. So I like Matthew Boyd the rest of the way. I'm going with Cade Povich next, and it's going to depend on how he does today against Boston. He could get sent down after that by the Orioles, but our latest note, which I see was written by Ryan Boyer, you may have heard of him, indicates that there's a chance that Albert Suarez is moving to the bullpen for the Orioles, which could mean that Cade Povich is taking his spot. Povich is one of the more interesting prospects in the Orioles system, although he's fallen to the 191st prospect here at RotoWire. He's got 2 red arrows next to his name because it hasn't happened for him at the major league level yet. He's gotten opportunities earlier this year. We've discussed him in 8 starts, 6.27 ERA, 169 WHIP, 14% strikeout rate, 13% walk rate. So odds are this doesn't work, but he's really crushed it at the AAA level. In 15 outings, 3.48 ERA, 111 WHIP, 28% strikeout rate, and an 8.5% walk rate. So that looks like a pitcher who's proven everything he can in the minors and just needs to sort things out at the big league level. And if he does, he will get a rotation spot for a very good team at a nice pitcher's park. So if Cade Povich is still on the Orioles roster tomorrow, it means he had a decent enough start that they're going to give him another start or 2. And if that is the case, then I do want him on my team because he is an interesting rookie pitcher with a great opportunity in a great situation. I think it's not going to work, so this is a pessimistic recommendation, but just want to make sure his name is out there just in case he does stick around, because you don't want to forget about a pretty interesting prospect on a good team and a good park.
I've got Cooper Criswell as my next recommendation, and you mentioned you had Nick Martinez on the outline prior to his not-so-great start. Cooper Criswell is coming off a not-so-great appearance on Friday. But I'll give him a little bit of a pass. He hadn't pitched in more than a week. He had COVID, reportedly a pretty bad case of it. Didn't have a rehab assignment. Pitched in bulk relief, got knocked around. So I'll give him a little bit of a pass for that one against a good lineup. Prior to that, he'd been pretty good. 4.02 ERA, 123 WHIP, 54 to 15 strikeout to walk rate in 62 2/3 innings and 13 starts. He also been really good in his 5 starts at AAA, 140 ERA, 23 to 8 strikeout to walk rate over 25 and 2/3 innings. It's not an exciting fantasy option. I think he's probably more fits the streamer type, but at least for now, he's likely the Red Sox 5th starter with James Paxton going down. I know they just signed Rich Hill. He could be an option, but I mean, if Cooper Criswell is pitching pretty well, I don't know that he should lose his spot to Rich Hill necessarily. So definitely more of a floor play, more of a streamer, but I think Cooper Criswell is a pretty solid option.
Yeah, I would agree. I would certainly be looking to him in a couple spots. My next guy here, Grant Holmes, a 28-year-old rookie for Atlanta who began his big league time in the bullpen, but has recently moved into the rotation and could stick there, depending on maybe if Reynaldo Lopez could take his spot back. He did make a rehab start, so maybe you're not going to have much more time with Holmes. But Lopez, of course, being a converted reliever, I don't know how many more starts he has in him. I would imagine Holmes is behind Spencer Schwellenbach, the way Schwellenbach has been pitching. So, again, maybe we're losing Grant Holmes soon. But in 45 innings between the rotation and the bullpen this year, he's got a 3.60 ERA, 113 WHIP, striking out 26% of opposing batters, walking just 6%. or 5.5, really. Pretty encouraging stuff there from Holmes. And he's looked mostly good enough since moving to the rotation. It's really his last start was his best one and is why he's on here today. 7 innings at the Giants, gave up just 2 runs, 8 hits, 6 strikeouts against 1 walk. Start before that was at Coors Field, so I don't want to get too mad at him for giving up a run per inning there. I'm not fully sold on Grant Holmes as some stud starter the rest of the way. Again, we're talking about a 28-year-old rookie here. But he's temporarily got that 5th spot. He's coming off a good start. He's pitching for a good team. It's just that Reynaldo Lopez situation. And if he's going to come back and be a starter, then we only have another start or 2 for Holmes. But if not, you could get Atlanta's 5th starter for the month of September for quite cheap right now.
Yeah, my next guy, I'm not totally sold on him being a stud or anything either, but Bowden Francis doing some interesting things for the Blue Jays. 2 starts since rejoining the rotation, has gone 12 innings, allowed just 3 runs, got a 15-1 strikeout to walk rate. Was really good in relief, primarily relief for the Blue Jays last season. And if you look at the last 2 seasons at AAA, he's had a 1.94 ERA, a whip below 1. 69-10 strikeout to walk rate in 46 1/3 innings. He's I guess maybe a late bloomer. He's, I think, 28 years old. As you mentioned with Grant Holmes, probably not a stud or anything, but he's getting an opportunity in the Blue Jays rotation. He's shown the ability to miss some bats, both at the major and minor league level. I think he's a viable, at least potential streaming option in good matchups.
Yeah, that'll be our budget pitchers. I think it was easier finding budget hitters than budget pitchers this week. If those names didn't do it for you, I do recommend Todd Zola's weekly pitcher rankings. He always highlights the 2-start pitchers who are available in a whole lot of leagues. So this might be a time where you just go grab one of those guys and then see who's out there after that as somebody you might pick up for the remaining 5 weeks. But for the budget hitters, like I mentioned, a whole bunch of call-ups this week, including somebody we've seen called up a few times before, Jordan Walker. He's only in the budget section, unfortunately, and maybe he shouldn't even be here. Jordan Walker looks like he is only filling the short side of a platoon at the moment after he was recalled on Monday. He hasn't done it at the big league level this year in 23 games, which is mostly just his time in early April, plus 3 games this week or something. He's hitting 152 with a 479 OPS, 0 homers, 0 steals, 28% strikeout rate. If you look at his total numbers at the AAA level, they're also bad. 92 WRC plus, 9 homers, 4 steals in about half a season. But man, this was one of the best prospects in baseball, 15 months ago or something. And even as recently as last year, he had figured something out down the stretch, hadn't he? He was sent down in April. He came back over the summer and was cold initially, but what was it, all of August and September, something like that. He looked like the player we thought he was going to be. And man, I'm not really seeing that guy now, which is why he's only in the budget section, even though this is, again, one of the top prospects in baseball, just got recalled this week. This should be the headline news for this entire show. I think he still has to have a mention, and there still has to be some teams where you add him and hope. But at this point, it's a pretty long shot that Jordan Walker actually helps your team in a meaningful way, at least the rest of this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think pick him up and hope is the right way to put it. I mean, I hate what the Cardinals are doing with him, honestly. I mean, he had just started to kind of figure things out at AAA. Had been hot over the last couple of weeks before getting called up, and then they call him up to serve in a short side platoon. It just doesn't really make much sense to me. I would rather, if that's the role they're going to have him in, I mean, call up Luke and Baker to get at bats against lefties and let Jordan Walker continue to play at AAA. But
yeah,
But I digress.
Just to annoy you before we move on to the next name, we didn't throw him on here, but would you rather pick up Jordan Walker or Dylan Carlson, who just had a homer and a steal on Friday?
You're really gonna put me on the spot with that one.
I am.
I mean, I guess it has to be Carlson because he's playing more.
All right.
Truthfully, though, I'm not terribly interested in either of them.
Just wanted to get a sense of just how low the interest in Walker is, even though, again, got to mention him, but don't have to pick him up.
Still bullish on him over the long haul, but yeah, I'm kind of redraft value. I don't think is going to necessarily be there rest of season. Another guy who is on the upswing for playing time, not so much like Jordan Walker, but Oswaldo Cabrera. Looking like he's going to be the regular third baseman for a bit. I know Jazz Chisholm says he's going to be back from his UCL thing in 10 days, but I've been fooled before by players being overly optimistic about their own injuries. I'd be very surprised if he's back that soon. And Oswaldo Cabrera doing really well in the second half, 296, 326, 546. Triple slash with 3 home runs and a couple of stolen bases since the All-Star break. You might remember he had that very hot streak at the beginning of the season when he was playing third base while DJ LeMahieu was banged up. Ultimately cooled off, and this is definitely more of a floor play, but he has a little bit of power, a little bit of speed, and he's triple eligible and getting regular at-bats in a good lineup. So I think that alone is enough to warrant attention in deeper formats, but I wouldn't go crazy over Oswaldo Cabrera.
Yeah, seems right to me. Let's end the show with a run of rookies here. Looks like is the way things are going to go. Trey Sweeney was called up by the Tigers. We've mentioned Spencer Torkelson already this show, and Jace Jung, a young of the guys we're seeing for the first time, is the more interesting prospect. I'm not sure where Sweeney's fantasy appeal sits relative to Spencer Torkelson's at this point, given how low Torkelson's is. But Trey Sweeney, who came over from the Dodgers in the Jack Flaherty deal, he really didn't do all that much for the Dodgers. At the AAA level in 96 games, it was an 87 WRC plus, 27% strikeout rate. Did have 13 homers and 16 steals, which indicates that it might be, more of a fantasy friendly profile than a real world friendly profile. Although, I guess throw in the fact that he's doing this at shortstop, maybe it works in the real world as well. Sweeney's just not a very exciting prospect. A lot of sources calling him a future 40 or a 45, some more of a utility guy or a low-end regular is probably what we're looking at with Trey Sweeney, but some power and some speed and some playing time. That's enough, at least for these deeper leagues, to say, let's see where this goes. It's just Javier Baez, who he'll have to beat out for playing time at shortstop the rest of the way. Maybe Baez, I guess, with a recent home run. He's got homers in 2 of his last 3 games. Maybe he's not going to go down quietly, and it'll take some time for Sweeney to claim the true starting role. If that's true, that really should keep the bids pretty minimal, because what we're looking at here is somebody who should play a lot as the Tigers try to figure out what they have, and if he's not playing a lot, I don't think you need him. But I think Trey Sweeney as a middle infield option who should, I think, be playing, 5 times a week, and might have some power and some speed, interested enough in certain formats.
Yeah, another middle infielder, another rookie, Will Wagner, son of Billy Wagner, in case you need another reason to feel old today. First 3 games at the major league level, all multi-hit games for Will Wagner. He's gone 7 for 12 with 3 doubles and 3 RBI. You look back at his AAA numbers, 315, 432 OBP, 444 slug, had a strikeout to walk rate of 37 to 59 at AAA. This is very much a rate stats guy with a good plate discipline guy. It reminds me a little bit, as a Cardinals fan, of kind of a Brendan Donovan type. He doesn't really stand out for power, doesn't really stand out for speed, but good plate skills, left-handed bat. I think he's going to offer limited home run potential, limited stolen base potential, but he can hit. And he's currently batting 6th for the Blue Jays, but given that skill set, probably the potential to move up. I mean, you could see him maybe potentially moving up to the 2 spot in between George Springer and Vlad Guerrero. That would be a nice spot for him to be in. It's a limited profile from a counting stats perspective, although if he should move up in the lineup, that would give him some runs potential, particularly with those on-base skills. So I think Will Wagner's a pretty good hitter. I don't know what the long-term upside is for fantasy, but if you're in the right situation, I think he could definitely have some appeal.
Yeah, I am interested enough in Wagner, as long as he keeps at least a large side of a platoon there in Toronto. Both Wagner and Trey Sweeney are off of our top 400 prospects here at RotoWire, but the next guy who we got a question about from Superman, I assume, unless that's Super Minnesota. Any thoughts on Shea Whitcomb of the Houston Astros? He is the number 216 prospect here at RotoWire with 2 green arrows next to him, so he must be good. Whitcomb, an older rookie. He's 25 years old, and he did do quite well at the AAA level this year, but that was after really struggling there in half a season last year. He had a 62 WRC plus as a 24-year-old at AAA, a 122 WRC plus as a 25-year-old at AAA. Now, he does look like a very different player. He cut his strikeout rate from north of 30% to south of 20% in his second try at the same level. Also in 108 games, 25 homers and 26 steals. That's some real fantasy juice there. So I'm interested to see if this turns out to be a particularly fantasy-friendly profile for a late-blooming infielder. There could really be something with Whitcomb, or he might have just been an older player who beat up on AAA pitching when he was overqualified. Enough, though, especially with that power and speed, to make me interested in taking a chance. We want to track the playing time, though, and as he just got called up, we don't yet know what it's going to be. But on the depth chart, we have him plugged in as the primary first baseman for the Astros. The other options there, Zach DeZenzo, John Singleton. So you could see not the stiffest competition. There's a path for Whitcomb to take that fantasy-friendly profile and start playing regularly. You could also see time at third base with Alex Bregman currently dealing with an elbow issue. So pretty low floor here. Again, somebody who wasn't really a prospect until he beat up AAA pitching as in his second attempt at age 25. But the extent to which he beat them up makes me interested enough. So somewhat interested in Shea Whitcomb. And then finally, I'm giving you a bonus name here. Drew Romo just got called up, catcher for the Rockies. If you play out of the park baseball, you'd know Drew Romo because he has 80 grade defense and you just sign him on all your teams and suddenly all your pitching staff is great. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but for several years, Drew Romo was a name you know there. I don't know if it's going to work in real life. And again, that defense first profile, ordinarily not what we want in a catcher, but it's at Coors Field. So Drew Romo, if he becomes the starting catcher down the stretch after the Rockies released Elias Diaz, that's the reason why Romo is here. Got to mention him as a potential primary catcher in Colorado, although the team could just give those at-bats to Jacob Stallings, in which case, I mean, should we throw Jacob Stallings on here? Are you picking him up if he's out there in a 2-catcher deep league? Sure, maybe.
Yeah, I struggle to always predict what the Rockies are going to do.
That's a good point.
The Elias Diaz release just kind of was odd. I saw that they contended that there was no market for him. They really couldn't get anything in a trade for him. That's bizarre. But yeah, now that they've called Drew Romo up, I'm sure they're going to give Jacob Stallings 75% of the starts. But yeah, I mean, Romo is somewhat interesting. probably glove over bat, but he put up some nice numbers in an admittedly very offensive-friendly environment in Albuquerque. He's actually shown some speed in the past in the minors, not so much this year, but he could be, one of those rare catchers who can contribute a handful of stolen bases. But yeah, I would keep an eye on the playing time. I think there's a chance if he does get enough playing time that he could be a second fantasy catcher down the stretch, particularly for weeks where they're at Coors Field.
Yeah, sounds right to me. And something that I may have mentioned in past weeks, the Rockies, 4 of their final 5 series are at home. So anybody in a league with playoffs, if you're going to make the playoffs, load up on some extra Rockies. You'll get all Coors Field all the time, pretty much, in the postseason. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you, listeners and commenters. Thank you to our sponsor, DraftKings' Pick 6. And we'll be back next week with another set of pickups. And I'll be back tomorrow with Sarah Sanchez, taking a look at the players who caught fire in the third quarter, trying to figure out which one of those will help your team down the stretch. That'll do it for us on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.